When I first got into film photography, I was basically using the camera we had at home, this Nikon F601M. It is a very nice camera and it has a lot of features. I would probably not have needed a different camera or to upgrade. I was very eager to try different types of cameras though, and one type I wanted to try in particular are these which have a manual film advance. I mean, it is quite cool, of course, if you compare to like newer cameras, but also because these newer electronic ones are quite loud, so it makes a lot of noise when taking picture. It's not a big deal actually, but yeah, it is much more silent. Or I don't know, in the case with this scene, it is not very silent either, So I started looking in flea markets if I could find something interesting. Unfortunately, I didn't really find anything in Finland. I mean, I was looking through the local flea markets and nothing which I was looking for, not that many interesting cameras overall. So yeah, it's a bit strange since that was also the time when people were switching to digital, so you can find a lot of, I mean, I wasn't finding them, but you could find a lot of cheap film gear. So yeah, maybe I was just looking in the wrong place, or apparently I was. In any case, so I went on a trip to Copenhagen and I decided to try to see if I could find something interesting in the thrifting stores there. And actually, the first one I went to, it had a lot of cameras, but most of them were these electronic types which I was not looking for. But after having searched a bit more in the thrift store, I actually found exactly what I was looking for. And not only that, it was a whole complete set, a manual mechanical film SLR, 3 lenses, a flash, a light meter, and some filters also. And also some leather cases for the lenses and the camera. So quite a good find, quite a good beginner's camera, I would say. Or it might have been, it could have been. Yeah. The camera I found was this Topcon Uni. Let's see if I can get a bit closer focus. Maybe. Now the Topcon brand might not be the most well-known camera manufacturer anymore today, because they don't make cameras anymore. They stopped in like the 80s. But back in the 60s, when this camera was new, they were quite well regarded, especially for their professional models. For example, the Topcon Super RE, which was released in 1963. And that camera was the first one with through the lens light meter. So it was quite innovative in that way. And it also became the camera of choice of the United States military. Although for some reason in the United States they renamed the camera to the Topcon Super D. I don't know why. I mean, actually it was called the Bestseller Topcon Super D. So now this camera, the Topcon Uni, was released in 1964. So the year after the Super RE. It also has the through the lens light meter, but it uses a different lens mount. It uses the Topcon UV mount and it has a leaf shutter. The Super RE uses the exact amount, and I think it has a focal plane shutter, so it's a bit different in that way. The design of the camera is quite square actually. If you compare it to this scene, there is some similarity. Or is there? Yeah, there is a little bit, but there are quite different designs though. The shutter release is placed here in the front, so that's quite different from other SLRs. But otherwise it is quite standard when it comes to design. I mean, the interior, the insides, no, it doesn't open from there. There's the latch on the bottom. Yeah, it's quite standard and typical for the time. Yeah, and as you can see, there's no focal plane shutter. There's directly the mirror. Since this camera is from the 60s, the light meter uses the PX625, the mercury batteries, 1.35 volt batteries, so yeah. Now this camera also has auto exposure. It has the shutter priority, so you can set on the lens to auto. And then you select your shutter speed and it will, expose for close the aperture to what it thinks is the right exposure. So yeah, I didn't use it on this camera. I used it on fully manual because I didn't have the right type of battery for it. And the lenses I got with the camera, one of them is this 135mm f4. Also I have a 35mm f3.5 and a 53mm f2. So it's a quite standard lineup for the time. I mean, you have the wide, the middle, and the long lens. Now, shooting with the camera didn't end very well. I didn't even get through a whole roll before the camera jammed. So it was not such a good deal after all as I had thought. Although, the reason why the camera broke is actually my fault. Because it's a camera from the 60s, and especially a camera with leaf shutter needs a lot of maintenance, because the lubrication gets sticky over time, and yeah, it can cause all sort of disruptions in your image making. And the thing you should definitely not do is to go out in freezing temperatures and shoot with the camera. So yeah, the thing I did, I went out to do some night photography. It was a very beautiful winter evening with like -10 or -15 degrees Celsius. So definitely a bit cold. And I had found a very interesting subject, lined up my shot. I mean, I had the camera on a tripod, I had like set the focus, exposure and everything. I clicked the shutter button and well, what happens? The shutter gets stuck halfway open. Yeah, apparently the lubrication in the camera had become frozen and became too sticky, so it got stuck. Yeah, that was the end of my story with this camera. So what you do at this point is to go online to try to find a solution. I couldn't find any direct solution, but one thing I found out that is that you can try to put some lighter fluid on this stuck shutter, and it might dissolve the old lubrication and the shutter might start working again. Now I did that, the shutter just went back in and it never came back out again. Usually it's not such a good idea to put any liquid, I mean any like solutions, dissolvents on shutters or any like parts of the camera, because you can just move the old grease around and goes places where it should not be. So yeah, the sort of proper way of doing it is to take the whole thing apart and clean the shutter blades like individually. It would have become quite expensive to repair this camera, to have it repaired, so I decided I would rather put that money on buying, well, a little bit more modern SLR. I did learn from a mistake and I checked a little bit more online, a bit more carefully what I can find and sort of what prices they go for. And I happened to find a Nikon F3 for quite a good price, and I still have the camera, it still works, so actually yeah, I learned from my mistake. Now, since this happened, well, in basically ancient times, you might wonder, why do I still have this camera and the lenses, and also the leather cases I have somewhere? I mean, I could have sold it, at least the lenses. Of course, the camera was broken, so it might not have been very attractive. But the thing is, with these lenses, the Topcon UV mount is, well, the aperture ring is not on the lens. It's here on the mount on the camera. So to make an adapter, you also need to make an aperture ring for it. And well, the adapters for these lenses are quite, well, they are not very common and they're quite expensive. So they are not very sought after in the online market. Now I don't have any actual, let's say, sentimental attachment to this camera. Well, basically because I didn't use it so much. I got, well, maybe half a roll shot with it. So even though it was the first 35mm SLR I bought, I mean, it doesn't really have any such value for me. Now, photos. I actually do have some since I got through a half a roll. So it does give a glimpse into what this camera can perform. I did mostly night photos with this camera, like long exposure night photos. I think even all of the photos might be long exposures. And on some of these photos, you can already see that the shutter is starting to fail. There are some like half exposed or half obscured photos. Now the photos, actually, I like them. I mean, I just wish I could have used the camera a bit longer for a few more rolls. I mean, if I had found it in the summer, I could probably have gotten through a few more rolls before the shutter failed. So, of course, ideally, I should have had the camera serviced, but, well, you learn by mistakes, I guess.